Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Jennifer Teal, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we are going to discuss the operative approaches for ICD-10-PCS. Understanding the approach definitions and knowing how to apply them to PCS is an integral part of being able to build an accurate code. ICD-10-PCS has some very specific definitions that it applies to these approaches. So an operative approach essentially describes an access location and a method used to get there, any type of instrumentation that is used. What you're seeing before you here is just one version of the ICD-10-PCS code book. Every publisher is a little bit different. And this version that I'm using, the operative approaches, as you can see, are in Appendix A of this particular book. Again, it might be a different appendix depending on which version of the code book you are using, but this is the one that I'm using today as an example. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit so that you can see this a little bit better. And what we have here, these are the ICD-10-PCS character values for these various operative approaches, and these are each of the operative approaches used in the medical and surgical section. We have first open approach, and when you're trying to figure out the approach, you really have to kind of figure out, well, how are they getting to the site of the procedure that they're performed? How are they accomplishing that particular procedure? And that's where some of these additional columns come into play here. So we can read the description: cutting through the skin or mucous membrane and any other body layers necessary to expose the site of the procedure. So with an open approach, they're really getting in there and getting down to whatever layer necessary to expose and see what they're doing and perform the procedure that way. So they're cutting into, and they're going to go through the skin or mucous membrane and any other body layers needed in order to reach the site of the procedure. And instrumentation is none. And when we're talking about instrumentation, we're not talking about things like a scalpel. Obviously, there are tools that are going to be used to perform the surgery itself, but that's not what we mean by instrumentation. Normally, the instrumentation in these operative approaches are more about whether they use instruments that allow them to visualize versus them seeing with their own eyes. So open approach, think about your abdominal hysterectomy. They go in through the abdomen. They actually cut the abdomen open to reach the site of the procedure and to perform the procedure. So that's our open approach. Next, we have percutaneous. Percutaneous is described as entry by puncture or minor incision of instrumentation through the skin or mucous membranes and any other body layers necessary to reach the site of the procedure. So they're going through the skin or mucous membrane, but it's just a puncture or minor incision. They're not opening up the patient completely to reach the body site of the procedure. So think about your needle biopsies or a fine needle aspiration. So something where they're just making a minor puncture in order to reach what it is that they're trying to do. So a needle biopsy of the liver is given as an example, and also like a liposuction, because they're just putting in the needle or the instrumentation in order to accomplish that. They're not actually opening up the patient. Percutaneous endoscopic is just like percutaneous, but the difference is that they now have instrumentation that allows them to visualize. So no instrumentation on percutaneous, and with instrumentation on the percutaneous endoscopic. So think of your laparoscopic type of procedures, okay? So they're going in just through a minor incision or puncture. So arthroscopic knee surgery, for example. So they would make a minor incision into the knee joint, and they would be using some sort of a scope to visualize. So with visualization. So any of your ones that say endoscopic endoscopic, endoscopic. Think of your terms that use oscopy. So you could see here, arthroscopy. You might have a colonoscopy, sigmoidoscopy. Things that are oscopy are going to indicate that a scope was used. EGD, esophagogastroduodenoscopy. Not always, but that's a good indicator that it's going to be one of these endoscopic approaches. Okay, so percutaneous is just a minor puncture, but without that instrumentation to visualize. Percutaneous endoscopic, again, a minor puncture or incision. They're not opening up the patient, but this time it's with visualization. Cholecystectomy, laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So cholecystectomy tells you ectomy, that they removed something, but this one could be an open approach or a percutaneous endoscopic approach, depending on how they accomplish the procedure. So if they say that it was a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, you're going to have percutaneous endoscopic. If it was an open cholecystectomy, then you would have an operative approach of open. Moving right along, we have our operative approaches that are via natural or artificial opening. So the access location is a natural or artificial opening, just like it says. So it's entry of instrumentation through a natural or artificial external opening to reach the site of the procedure. So your natural or artificial opening, you think about things that are done orally, through the nose, through the vagina, that's a natural opening. Your artificial openings are going to be things like if you had a stoma, some kind of a stoma, they created an artificial opening and they're accessing it that way, some kind of an ostomy type of a situation. So the difference here, via natural or artificial opening, via natural or artificial opening endoscopic. So again, that's the with visualization. And then we have with percutaneous endoscopic assistance. So this one here is not going to be used much at all, but here's your example. So a laparoscopic assisted vaginal hysterectomy. So they have that percutaneous endoscopic. That's your laparoscopic assisted, because they're going to put in ports in the abdomen to insert the scopes, but then the procedure itself is actually performed via natural or artificial opening. So this one here is like a combination. And finally, we have an external approach. And your external approach is directly on the skin or mucous membrane, external, outside of. So there's no instrumentation, it's direct or indirect application. So think about a dislocation, when they put a dislocation back in place, it's external force that's applied, a closed fracture reduction. Resection of tonsils actually falls under external approach too, because they can get to the tonsils directly. Now, with this particular version of the code book, one of the things that I like in this one is that after we have all of these definitions and descriptions, we now have some visual pictures that are going to aid us in understanding better what these are all about. So just to give you a glance at these, you can see when we talked about an open approach, remember I said they completely open up. They cut into the patient to reach the site of the procedure. So you can see here, they've got these retractors where they're just pulling the skin open so they can get in there and access the location of the procedure. Then percutaneous, as you can see a puncture or minor incision, they're just poking through the skin to get to what they need to. So in this case, it's a needle that is punctured through the skin. And in here, it's a lung mass. So they're doing a fine needle aspiration of some sort. So you can see that it's just a minor puncture or incision in order to reach the site. They didn't open them up like they did in this one. Next, we have the percutaneous endoscopic. So you can see that's when they use some kind of a laparoscope. And this is the patient laying down, and you can see that they put in these ports here so that they can get in there with their instrumentation in order to visualize. Because remember, any of the endoscopic is with the use of instrumentation to visualize. So in a case like this, you can see these trocars, right? 3 ports that were placed. They didn't actually cut into the patient like they do up here in this open. So they're not opening them up here. They're just minor incisions for these ports right here. And that's why it's percutaneous endoscopic, because it's through the skin, kind of like this, but it's with instrumentation to actually visualize. So you have these entries right here, and then you can see on the camera. So percutaneous endoscopic. Next, we have over here via natural or artificial opening. And in this case, the vagina is used as an example. That is a natural opening. So if they had to come up here and do something in the uterus, that would be via natural or artificial opening. If they're also using that scope instrumentation to visualize, in this case, we have the example where they're using a natural opening. So you have here, they're going in here, an oral opening, and then they're putting the camera down in here into the trachea and into the bronchi so that they can see, and maybe they're going to do a biopsy or a brushing or a washing or something like that. So that would be natural or artificial opening endoscopic. So seeing the picture actually helps make the connection between the definition and how it's actually achieved. Now we have natural or artificial opening with the percutaneous endoscopic assistance. So we talked about a laparoscopic assisted hysterectomy. So they go through the natural opening, but they have the visualization through these percutaneous endoscopic, the laparoscope. And so it's that combination of both. And then external, you can see it's just the application of force from outside of the body. There's no puncture. They didn't cut them open. Here, they might be just, they're putting the bones back in line. So they're using force for a displaced fracture, perhaps, or a dislocation, something like that. So you could see the hands are completely outside the body, no puncture, no cut, no anything like that. So that would be your external approach. So I hope you found that helpful. If you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to my channel, and I hope to be back with some more content here in the future. Again, Dr. Jennifer Teal out.